God, full body repair. Deduct the points from me. Zhen began yelling as soon as he returned to God's realm. However, it had some shortness of breath. After all, he was missing a lung, and his body looked in dire straits. If it was slower by just tens of seconds, he would have stayed permanently in Aragon, and it would have been a stay as a corpse. After a short while, God's healing light retracted. Zhen was the last to complete his repair. It had taken over 10 minutes, as his injuries were simply too grievous. Just the cost of healing had been over 3,000 points. Only when everyone had waited for very long did Zheng finally slowly descend from mid-air. Before Zheng and the rest could say anything, a black shadow stuck itself in and a giant tongue licked Zheng. There was actually a 30-meter tall, 50-meter long giant black dragon standing on the platform. Just that tongue was 3 or 4 meters long. This wasn't so much a lick as a shower of dragon saliva. It didn't stop there, as the giant dragon even started extending a claw towards Zheng. Stop. Doggy, stop. Zheng hurriedly shouted. He wiped the saliva on his face, then anxiously continued, you're not allowed to lick anyone from now on, nor are you allowed to pounce on anyone like just now. You'll crush someone. However, Cheng Xiao was at the side, laughing while saying, forget about it if it's licking guys, licking girls would be great. Ha ha ha, it'll definitely look sexy if they're soaked wet. Zheng glanced sideways at him, then said unhappily, you're not allowed to pounce on anyone, but Cheng Xiao. Finished speaking, he ignored the screaming Cheng Xiao who was evading dragon claws, but looked directly at Xian. So, how do we tell everyone the information we obtained? This information we risk our lives to get is too significant. I don't know whether to tell everyone. Zheng said to Xian. Xian was currently rubbing his right eye in a very strange manner. When Zheng asked, this fellow actually didn't even raise his head and answered, it's up to you. If we don't overcome the final battle, any amount of information is useless. Besides, they may not be able to return to the real world after the final battle. Muttering for a while, Zheng looked around. He then intentionally looked at Lori, who was beside him. After a long while, he finally said, then everyone, don't go and rest for now. Come to my room, I have things to tell everyone. Everyone found this weird, but still followed behind Zheng to his room. The one exception was Xian, who kept rubbing his eyes as he made his way back to his own room. From his fanatical expression, his fellow must have discovered something and went off to research it alone. As everyone entered the room, the dragon also began to get anxious. It squatted at the room door, whimpering incessantly, sounding like a dog's whimpering magnified several times over. When Zheng came out of the room carrying a badge, the dragon immediately brought its face close, seemingly wanting to lick Zheng once again. Frightened, Zheng immediately raised the badge. Within an instant, the dragon disappeared, while the badge let off a faint black light. Okay, settled. I didn't expect the badge Xian gave would actually be useful. Can they be stored in this badge as long as they're your pet? If someone else has such an enormous pet, would they be able to store it inside together? Zheng scratched his head and muttered. He then kept it in his pocket and entered the room. Everyone had already been orderly seating down in the room waiting for him since a long time ago. Even the usually flirting Cheng Xiao didn't go and tease Kong. Of course, it could possibly be because he was frightened as she was currently resting her hands on her sword. If that invisible two-handed sword hit him, he wouldn't be getting off with just some light injuries. Zhen nodded to everyone there. What I'm about to say next is very important. It can be said that a large majority of God's realm secrets have been revealed. But, an equivalent price must be paid at the same time to know this information. The price is that you won't be allowed to return to the real world until your power reaches mine or Xian's level. Do you still want to hear this information? Just as the words fell, Wangxia directly stood up. Apologies. I won't be listening to this information. I originally planned to try my best to save points after the final battle to return to the real world. The duty I was entrusted with is much more important than this so-called truth. My country needs me. While speaking, Wangxia had already left the room through the door. Zheng exhaled. He was actually quite impressed with Wangxia's decisiveness. After all, what humans had the most of was curiosity. This was especially when Wangxia could decisively give up on this kind of truth which everyone wanted to know just as it was about to be announced. Just this unswerving determination let one understand how he was an iron-willed soldier. Alright, does everyone left think the same? Remember, if you know this information, you won't be able to return to the real world until you reach Xian's current power. Understood? Zheng spent a few sentences emphasizing it, before carefully detailing his bitter experiences in Aragon, the battles in the Abyss, Xian's hypotheses, as well as the changes in the Abyss after finding out these hypotheses. Towards the end, he said, this is the information I obtained in Aragon. For now, let's not discuss whether this information is true. However, if it's really as Xian analyzed, there will great changes when we obtain this information. Thus, we won't be able to go back to the real world before we get stronger. Does everyone understand? Everyone was deep in thought regarding this information. For a time, no one replied him. Zheng wasn't in a hurry. He walked to beside Lori, pulling the little girl into an embrace. Don't worry, Lori. I'll choose suitable enhancements for you and let you raise your strength. I'll also always stay by your side to protect you. After the final battle, let's think of a way to return to the real world, alright? Lori adorably nodded her head. However, Her expression still carried some confusion. After all, as a girl not even 20 years of age, she already spent her days in this realm quaking with fear. Although she didn't enter the movies herself, her man, Zheng, was still a God's Realm team member, and even a team's core, its leader. He would return from every movie covered with wounds, or even torn to pieces sometimes just like now. She would sometimes spend her nights terrified, spending night after night sleeplessly. Then today, she suddenly heard that she wouldn't be able to return to the real world at least for a short period of time. At least for this young girl's mentality, not crying on the spot was already quite strong-willed already. Everyone else was slightly dejected. With the final battle approaching, there had been several with thoughts of going for a trip to the real world. Now, they couldn't go back. Also, they had some misgivings in their hearts. Logically speaking, the final battle was near. However, since they knew this information, did that mean they wouldn't be able to return after? Zheng saw everyone's misgivings, he released Lori and got back to his seat. He then said, in Aragon, Xian told me the final battle was only a final battle in name. At that time, I didn't understand what he meant. Only when I was under God's hypnosis in the abyss did I suddenly understand. God's hypnosis? Everyone asked, surprised. Yes. I finally felt that half-dreaming and half-awake sensation from when we enter movies. Zhen nodded his head, saying seriously, I can sense the energy waves God exerts on me when I unlock the mid-fourth stage and enter dragon transformation. Although I can't block it, it's still a big improvement from being unable to even react like before. I think that it's possible to resist God's wipe if the late fourth stage is unlocked. After all, the so-called wipe is likely caused by energy, while the late fourth stage can control energy to a certain degree. At that time, the greatest threat God poses to our team, the wipes, won't be an issue anymore. This will become an absolutely safe location then. When Zheng said this, the first to react was Honglu, who immediately stood up in surprise. I understand now. As expected, the final battle is only one in name. This information is also indeed obtained by our current power, although it is slightly early. Everyone was slightly puzzled. Honglu immediately said, the reasoning is simple. According to our previous calculations, we can return to the real world after the final battle. But this was merely a conjecture, while God never told us this explicitly. We just took it a matter of course. But based on Zheng's experiences in Aragon, it could be God's special arrangements to have teams as strong as, or stronger than us to enter specially designated worlds with the answers to the mysteries of God's realm hidden in them. However, it would require great power to obtain these answers, and it would no longer be possible to return to the real world. This is likely the trap of the creators of God's realm, the saints and cultivators. Of course, this trap also explains why the final battle is only one in name. Since we need to live on, or in other words, since we want to live on, we'll need to experience the horror movie worlds, a terror infinity. Honglu paused here. He plucked a hair off from in front of his forehead, carefully considering his words before saying, the most likely reason for the so-called final battle is because someone among the teams has unlocked the fifth stage, or the late fourth stage Zheng mentioned before, and possesses the power to resist God's wipe. Let's analyze the situation this ability would cause. Firstly, the possessor, as well as those around him, can no longer be wiped by God. The movie worlds won't have much meaning to them anymore. For example, if they don't want to enter a world, they can just not stand inside when God's beam appears. Since God can't kill them anyways, they could just train in God's realm for 10 years. Who would be their match then? Of course, this is just an example. After all, God can also alter the flow of time apart from wiping. If they train there for 10 years, we could have experienced several hundred movies by then, and we may be stronger than them by then. But having the ability to avoid being wiped is like having a modding tool in a game. They wouldn't be afraid of God's punishments, and the movie worlds will truly be their point farming grounds. Thus, God has to initiate the final battle. But, there's a doubt I've had for a very long time. What's the point of the final battle? Honglu paused when he reached this point. He plucked several hairs consecutively and placed them on the table. The power of cultivators and saints surpasses us by 1,000 or even 10,000 times, just going by God's realm's existence, a masterpiece that fuses space, time, and energy. Their level of science and their power far surpasses us. To us, they're like God's creating the world, just like how barbarians would see our planes and cars as witchcraft. If even two such great powers lost to an unknown power, how could the far inferior us save humanity? Could the final battle possibly create powerhouses of the 6th stage, 7th stage, or the 8th stage? So, what's the point of this final battle? That's what I had doubts about before. Now, I have my answer. Add together all the information we have. The monsters in the abyss. Being unable to return to the real world if you know the information. The late 4th stage that can resist God's wipe. The imminent final battle. Connect them and you'll find we're already caught in the saints and cultivators trap. In other words, we're already doing as they wished. This also tells us why we, despite being weaker by thousands or 10,000s of times, were entrusted with the burden to save humanity. Everyone looked strangely at Honglu. Even Zheng, who previously had a look of comprehension, had the same expression. The little boy giggled, it seems everyone doesn't understand? Then he'll analyze it piece by piece. Firstly, are we unable to return to the real world due to the information from the abyss? Everyone nodded hearing this. Honglu then said, then, What about after the final battle? What course of action do we take? The answer is to continue to become stronger in God's realm, which is why I said the two words, terror infinity. If the late fourth stage can resist God's what, then what about a higher stage? Can they control God? I haven't thought about this for the time being. However, what do you think a place where you won't be wiped, where you can get stronger as long as you maintain control, and where you can exchange God's various enhancements sounds like? That's right, a training camp, or a training camp for humans to get stronger. Understand? We are the trailblazers selected by the saints and cultivators. If we don't wish to die or be lonely, or hope for our family to have longevity or have any other expectations for the real world, we have to return to the real world. But, alas, us who know the information can't return. So, what do we do? The one and only answer is to let others from outside in. As long as we can control God, this is easily done. Zheng had unlocked the third stage since just now. Hearing this, he exhaled, before saying, I understand. This is the intention of the saints and cultivators. After they were destroyed, their goal would be partially accomplished if 100 out of 10,000 managed to become strong and survive in the last seed they left behind, God's realm. What if 10 of this 100 knows this information, with one of them being afraid of death? He'll avoid returning to the real world, instead continuing to get stronger inside until the point he can control God to pull people in. Their goal will be accomplished then. This endless pulling of people in and the following growth in strength will one day form the Saint organization and cultivator organization once again. So, it turns out that the final battle is just to choose who'll pull others in? That's right. Honglu snapped his fingers. That's what it means. Heaven and earth are merciless, and so are saints. There's no such thing as right or wrong, only whether you have the desire to live on. The constantly silent Zero suddenly asked, will humanity become extinct if those that know the information go out to the real world? Honglu shook his head. If we were going to become extinct, it would have ended up so long ago. It's like when we make a computer program. The ordinary program is naturally necessary since we need it. However, viruses need to be deleted as soon as they're discovered. Similarly, we who know this information are viruses to the box creators. Would you destroy the computer because there's a virus, especially the core programs? Thus, those who return to the real world will likely be surrounded and killed by endlessly appearing organisms like Zheng was in the abyss, while ordinary humans won't be. In his analysis, Honglu had voiced out the truth behind the scenes. Although they were just his inferences, the reasoning was practically seamless. Although it had some inadequacies, this analysis should be close to the truth based on its sense of completeness. At the very least, there weren't any loopholes too large to be found. For a time, everyone felt slightly blank. After all, the analysis mentioned the saints and cultivators trap, which differed too much from the final battle they had originally thought of. They were stuck on this boat when they obtained this information, and returning to the real world had become incomparably difficult. Also, returning to the real world would require increasing their own strength, as well as pulling people in to join them as Honglu said. The saints and cultivators scheme was indeed good, to have them improve their own power and humanity's overall power at the same time. Alright, everyone stop thinking about it. Zheng suddenly opened his mouth. Now's not the time for this. Whatever the final battle represents, it's still a true final battle for us. We'll only have a so-called future if we win and defeat Team Devil, reaching the apex of this realm. Thinking of the future is pointless if we lose. So, why not think about the final battle instead of thinking about the saints and cultivators trap, as well as whether we can return to the real world? Whatever the case, this battle is a true final battle for us. Zheng hadn't put it badly, as Team China had indeed reached an extremely high level of power. Looking through the entire realm, there weren't more than 3 teams that could resist Team China. Amongst them was Team Devil, titled the strongest team in the realm. If Team China could beat Team Devil in the final battle, teams that could rival Team China practically didn't exist considering Zheng's power and Xian's intelligence. Thus, this battle really did mean a final battle to Team China. When everyone had left, Zheng pulled Honglu aside. The little boy froze, but still obediently stayed behind. When everyone had cleared out, Zheng finally said, when I returned here just now, I checked the next battle over at God. It's a team battle with Team East Sea in the perfect storm, a disaster film. It's nothing much, except God's notification was rather dreadful. This is the second last movie. God clearly stated that the final battle is next. Honglu froze. He wasn't in a hurry to leave, but found a chair to sit on. He contemplated as he said, that's normal. It's not far from what we predicted. The final battle will come 2 or 3 movies from then. There was Aragon, for our young dragon to mature, and now Team East Sea, which can let our sleeping members wake up. God has indeed already determined the participants for the final battle, which are any teams that reach a certain standard of power. They'll be the top teams to participate in the final battle. All the top teams will meet movies like Aragon, which will allow them to perfect their combat power. This completely matches up with what we hypothesized. Correct, Zheng nodded. He said, did you know? It's precisely because it's in line with what you two hypothesized that your analysis today shocked me. When I checked the next movie after my repair was complete, I also checked for exchanges with a certain special use at the same time. That item, called the Shielding Runestone, indeed exists. It can allow a safe return to the real world for a period of time, determined by the quantity of energy within the runestone. The runestone can store high-class energies like refined chi, magic, immortal spiritual energy and divine energy. Understand what I mean? That word safe is especially suspicious, and together with your analysis just now, makes it very likely we've entered the saints and cultivators trap. The real world is a place of death for us. Hunglu too, bitterly laughed. He shook his head, not knowing what he should say. He could only sigh, and this little boy proceeded to silently leave the room. Zheng also sighed. He suddenly retrieved the badge storing the black dragon. As he handed it to Hunglu, he said, "I'll hand over the tamer medallion to you. It can summon the black dragon inside. It's been raised by us since young, so it'll naturally battle for us after coming out. The little doggy is quite smart. I'll give it to you for protection. If Xian faces his clone from Team Devil in the final battle, the key to victory will likely be you. Use it to increase your power." Hunglu didn't decline. He kept the medallion, then smiled. "Any other treasures? Take them all out. The final battle is approaching." Yu and Xian seemed to be hiding something else. Zheng froze briefly, then smiled bitterly as he shook his head, saying, "I may not have much else, but my points are over 40,000 and I have a rank S and 2 rank A rewards. I think I can help exchange some nice things for everybody, and at least give the weaker members an upgrade. Wait for tomorrow. After everyone has rested, we'll discuss how to use my points and rank rewards." Hunglu nodded. He was very satisfied with this leader, Zheng. Although he was lacking in terms of his ruthless decisiveness, his other aspects were perfect. However, when had Zheng actually secretly saved so much points and rank rewards? That's right, his path of advancement has already been fixed. Any further enhancements are just biting off more than he can chew, which is why he should just focus on his mastering his control and collision of refined chi and magic. So that's why his points and rank rewards are so great after a few continuous movies, a team battle, and the side quest for Aragon's Abyss. Speaking of which, I really need to plan it well for the rank S and 2 rank A rank rewards. Hunglu chuckled as he walked. In truth, he really wanted to advance his weave magic to the utmost in his heart. If he could use level 9 magic, there was a level 9 spell named Wail of the Banshee. Within the range of this howl, all living things had a high probability of instantaneous death. It was an existence slightly ridiculous even among rank S enhancements. However, it was indeed because it was a ridiculous enhancement that the burden from usage must be extremely high, which is why Hunglu hadn't decided whether to exchange it. If I don't exchange Wail of the Banshee, the enhancements that can benefit Team China's strength the most is Tenji's and Lu Yi's. Tenji's hypnosis is indeed weak in the earlier stages. But once it's exchanged and becomes successful, someone like him who can sense brainwaves and can hypnotize will be just as strong as that monster from Nightmare on Elm Street. No, perhaps this may even be that monster's enhancement. As for Lu Yu, if we exchanged an divine card like Obelisk the Tormentor, his battle power can immediately rise to Zero's level at minimum. These two exchanges are the most worthwhile. Hunglu pondered as he walked. Gradually, he had already gone very far away, before Zheng turned to smile at Lori. The young girl smiled back. The second day, everyone gathered in Zheng's room once again. Of course, this excluded that fellow Xian. When the final person reached, Zheng let out everything about the next movie and it being the second last battle, as well as all his points and rank rewards. Apart from me keeping 10,000 points, the rest can all be used to enhance everyone else. Everyone else should also have some points and rank rewards of their own, right? Zheng smiled at everyone. Naturally ignoring Independence Day, Aragon's side quest had given each person 5,000 points and a rank B reward. Together with what each person had saved already, everyone should have a tidy sum of points and rank rewards. Zero, Yingkong and Wang Xia nodded silently. Chang Xiao and the rest started to snigger, especially Lu Yi, who complacently took out a card. This is a new card I exchanged yesterday, Red Eyes Black Dragon, fake, which needed a rank B reward. Although it's not as good as the rank A real Red Eyes Black Dragon, it's still very strong and can be summoned for 10 minutes. However, it's only 10 meters long. Zheng sighed. It wasn't good of him to scold Lu Yi, since the movie he had joined the team had been extremely difficult. He himself had died inside, and he had created chaos, Genesis Splitter upon his revival, so he hadn't concerned himself too much with the other members' enhancements. After all, the veterans all knew their own path of improvement, with only the two newbies not being very certain. Ask me before you exchange items next time. The leader privileges allow me to do a quick search of exchangeable items from God. Your Red Eyes Black Dragon card is at best just a monster summoning card. I'm not saying it's not strong, but there are obviously cards much stronger than it in existence. I now have large amounts of points and rank rewards to use, so you exchanging this card is repetitive. Right, summoning cards uses your psyche force? Zheng asked, frowning. Lu Yu was slightly worried as he looked at the surrounding people. He nodded lightly, and looked to have been scared by Zheng. Zheng patted his head. Don't worry. It's nothing major, just a repetition of exchanges. If this card uses your psyche force to summon, it won't be a case of becoming more powerful with greater quantity. If you can summon one extremely strong card, it's definitely better than depleting your psyche force summoning 100 trash monsters. Understood. I perused through your summon cards. The strongest 3 summoned monsters are Slifer the Sky Dragon, Obelisk the Tormentor and the Winged Dragon of Ra. Slifer needs to devour the other monsters you summon. The Winged Dragon will amalgamate all the monsters you summon. These two summons are stronger the stronger you are. For now, there won't be that many points and rank rewards to let you become so strong. Thus, Obelisk the Tormentor is the most suitable for you to summon in comparison. After Zheng had finished speaking to Lu Yu, he turned to Junshin. This white-collar newbie looked serious, completely unlike his initial arrogance and willfulness. He asked, Junshin, did you exchange any enhancements? Junshin froze momentarily, bitterly smiling as he shook his head. I took a fancy to a certain enhancement with only two types, initial and late stage. The initial stage needs a rank A reward, while the late stage needs 2 rank A rewards, which is altogether a rank S reward. I don't have that much points and rank rewards to enhance myself. So, I was planning to enhance myself after the team battle before the final battle. Zhen nodded inwardly. He thought internally that this fellow was quite sharp. Considering the current Team China's battle strength, other teams, apart from Team Devil, Team Celestial and certain members of some slaver teams with exceedingly high enhancements, wouldn't have a chance to kill the protected members of Team China. Thus, it was understandable that he had kept his points and rank rewards to get an even higher grade enhancement. Right, what enhancement are you thinking of strengthening? Zheng curiously asked immediately. Marble Phantasm. The name sounds pretty strange, but it allows you to materialize anything you've seen before using the outline in your mind. You can also perfectly use it. If I could materialize the ancient bell Xian used to block your attack that time, I wouldn't be afraid of entering movies. Junshin laughed. If we could perfectly use the bell of the East Emperor, I myself wouldn't be afraid of entering movies. Zheng briefly bantered, before looking at Imhotep. Imhotep, although your physique is more unique, you can still get the various enhancements from God, especially the Suna no Mi. It's compatible with your invulnerable sand form body. It'll be extremely strong, with even the soul weakness, water, gone. Unless they use pure force to forcefully wreck your body will be practically indestructible. Aang Sunamuon, your physique is actually very good, with various combat techniques. Why not enhance something similar to Qi-based martial arts? Zheng exercised his leader privileges, searching through God continuously and explaining to everyone their enhancements and paths. In the end, he said, the basic situation is like that. Ugh, take it as I didn't just say that. Anyways, It'll still be hard-pressed enhancing everyone with the points now, so well do the enhancement after the battle with Team East Sea, together with the sleeping few. Then the final battle comes. As Zheng finished speaking, Xian coincidentally walked out from his room. The fellow was holding a crystal, shining with a gentle light. It was obviously the cultivation manuals Zheng got from the mummy world. The basic situation is like that. Because the information to be translated contains various aspects, only 5% has been translated for even the most initial foundation establishment stage. This information here is that 5% of content. It roughly explains about the nature of all things and energy in the universe. It contains a majority of quantum mechanics, some of general relativity, the mass energy conversion, E equals mc2, spatial energy and so on. The conversion formula between refined Qi and the aforementioned energies is Xian said as he ate a tomato. Stop stop stop! Zheng was shouting at the side. Not only him, but everyone else showed an expression of incomprehension. Xian gave everyone a sidelong glance. He didn't say his catchphrase of immortal's wisdom but instead said, the conversion formula is merely the very first step of cultivation. It means to convert all the energies freely floating in space, such as ionic energy, cosmic rays energy, light energy, or thermal energy, into refined Qi or magic that can be absorbed and stored by the human body. The exact method is using rune technology. You need rune technology to guide you in the first stage, called foundation establishment. You transform from a normal human to a cultivator with refined Qi or magic within their bodies. After that, you don't need runes to convert refined Qi. However, the rune technology for foundation establishment unfortunately needs someone with refined Qi to prepare it. In other words, the first cultivator never existed. Doesn't exist? What does that mean? Everyone asked curiously. It's the same logic as whether the chicken or the egg came first. If becoming a cultivator needs another cultivator to help establish the foundation, then how was the first cultivator created? Based on the thorough understanding of energy inside, I believe the first cultivator is likely a saint. It's exactly because of his betrayal that the cultivator organization appeared. Compared to the saints that can only grow through countless battle, cultivators are undoubtedly a science of advancing. That's why, the situation of cultivators outnumbering saints occurred later on. If so, it can be understood why saints despised cultivators, while cultivators looked down on saints too. Xian paused here momentarily. The refined Qi foundation establishment requires can be provided by Zheng. Although you lack a cultivator's physique, we have the One Ring, so we have refined Qi. What remains is treasure with refined Qi type runes. Although you have refined Qi, you can neither utilize it or fuse it into a material body. So, there's only one way left. Zheng had been slightly disheartened at first, and thought that cultivator techniques were lost to him. However, who would have expected that Xian would reverse the topic and say this? Could there be another way to him to complete his foundation establishment? There is a way. Do you still remember the treasure you obtained from Luo Yinglong in Lord of the Rings? Those 8 small flags, called the 8 trigrams cauldron, are cultivator treasures of the Dao. The 8 small flags materials are completely sufficient if it's just for foundation establishment. Next, We need a large quantity of energy to activate the formation. Your foundation establishment needs to be accomplished within 0. something seconds. Xian said as if everything was normal. Wait. Zheng suddenly asked curiously, you always like to make things sound as if they're no big deal, whether scheming, or tricking us. I'm getting a very bad vibe this time when you spoke of a huge source of energy. Xian was slightly speechless as he gave Zheng a sidelong look. He then said, it needs roughly 5.87211021 J of energy. This is the energy produced by splitting an atom, if converted to heat. It is the total heat produced by the sun in 0.001 seconds. It is the total energy used by humanity in 500 years, or in terms of... Wait. Zheng directly cut him off. Just give it to me straight. How long can this energy operate the bell of the East Emperor if it's used to do so? About 10 minutes. Xian didn't even need to think about it. He directly said, the miniature fusion reactor in my basement can't produce such energy. This energy also needs to be transmitted within 10 seconds, and can't be stored like electricity or other forms of energy. So, we only have one way unless we have over 100 miniature fusion reactors simultaneously outputting energy on overload. Zheng's mind flashed, as he suddenly realized what Xian was planning. He immediately shouted, you can't possibly be thinking of using the magic cannon to shoot me, right? Since foundation establishment is so difficult, how did so many cultivators appear? Don't trick me, there must be a problem with your translation. Either that or you're making use of this opportunity to test if I can resist the magic cannon. Don't try to trick me. A mortal's wisdom. Xian curled his lips in contempt. He coldly smiled, correct, the only remaining way is to fire the magic cannon. But it's not a direct shot. It's just using the magic cannon as an engine. At the moment refined chi and magic mix and annihilate each other, send that energy instantaneously into the formation. The energy at that moment will reach the amount needed for foundation establishment. As for the difficulty in foundation establishment you mentioned, it's not that it's difficult. We just can't use this type of energy, so there's a resultant inefficiency of over 99.9%. This inefficiency is unavoidable. If we had a foundation establishment cultivator to operate this formation, there wouldn't be so much inefficiency. The basic situation is like that. Establish your foundation if you want to grasp refined chi and magic. Zheng's heart was indeed moved. Who wouldn't have their heart moved by those lofty immortals of myth, and power of legend? But, he wasn't able to relax and asked, will it really not be dangerous? Also, he'll be able to freely use refined chi and magic after foundation establishment. Will I be able to use explosion, destruction, and that final move infinitely? Xian coldly laughed continuously. He shook his head. Not so simple. Your power is too far from ordinary foundation establishment cultivators. How could they be your match? Although you merely possess the foundation establishment cultivation, your power is at the peak of the 4th stage. The source of power for those 3 moves isn't purely refined chi or magic, but you forcefully merging these opposing cultivation energies using your genetic constraint, and using the power from the resultant annihilation reaction. It can be said that you are the union between a saint and cultivator, yet neither at the same time. If you really want to use these 3 moves infinitely, the first condition is that you have initial energy manipulation. Otherwise, don't even think about it. As for the rise in power after foundation establishment, I can't say accurately. The so-called power is dependent on how much an individual can unleash. How much it rises is up to your own standard. Zheng sunk into thought for a moment. He grabbed Xian and said seriously, fine. But you have to promise there's no danger. Yes, I promise. Xian nodded his head calmly. Although he says that, why do I feel he's saying I tricked you inside? Zheng truly had a sense of terror towards Xian inside. This mentality was born from the dozen of times tricked by and schemed by. Until now, he was slowly starting to get used to it. If Xian wasn't tricking him, the sun would surely rise from the west. Carrying these feelings, everyone followed Xian to his basement. The basement had already been converted into a futuristic laboratory. Apparatuses none could name filled the place, multi-hued energies flashing within. Seeing it for the first time, it looked like a world from centuries in the future. Doraemon, the technological standard had increased by a lot since before. Zheng said almost sighingly. Xian nodded. Yes. The scientific portions of cultivation techniques far outstrip the battle portions. Instead of calling cultivators competents, it's better to call them scholars, or scientists in pursuit of the truth. The technology standard here is further along from the real world than 300 to 500 years. The miniature fusion reactor especially, has already progressed from the initial atom splitting to photon splitting. It can be renamed a photon reactor. Then, when discussing the domain of the unknown, Xian's entire being became fanatic. Those fanatical emotions in his eyes were especially obvious, scaring everyone around. Apart from a few, they all held their breath and looked around. Wangzia was also excited. After a long time, he asked, if we bring these technologies back, our country will. Hearing this, Xian gave him a sidelong glance, before turning around to say, I advise you not to have this mentality. Giving a child an atomic bomb is obviously going to kill the child. Humanity doesn't have the qualifications to hold this tier of technology with their current level of civilization. Perhaps our country can in a short time use these weapons and technologies to become the world's overlord, but this will just be the start of Armageddon. Understand? China's government isn't suitable to hold this enormous authority, at least until the parasites are cleansed. If this government grasps humanity's future, and it becomes strong enough that it is the sole voice in the world, that cultural calamity that occurred during our nation-building phase will happen once again. Understand? A supreme authority appearing isn't a good thing. We have to at least have this supreme authority mature till it can accept all this, but not naively believe it's greater than all of humanity. Otherwise, I won't let you bring these technologies back. Wang Xia was momentarily speechless. He didn't understand why Xian was doing this. In Wang Xia's mind, the country's benefits were first and foremost. It was even more important than his life. However, his personal ability wasn't sufficient yet to bring these technologies back. Just revealing all this would make God wipe him, so only Xian could safely bring all these out. Ignoring what Wang Xia was thinking, Xian extended his hand to Zheng. "Hand the 8 small flags to me." Zheng didn't hesitate. He directly took out the 8 trigrams cauldron. Xian pressed a few buttons on a control panel. At a distant spacious area, the steel floor slowly opened. A jade platform, filled with rune diagrams, rose from below. There were 8 giant circles, several tens of thousands of runes and countless strange diagrams. The 8 meters in diameter formation was incomparably complicated. It wasn't known how much effort Xian had put into it. Everyone sighed. After looking for a long time, Hung's sharp eyes noticed the runes actually weren't engraved on, but countless metal threads inlaid within the jade. The 8 giant circles were formed from metal threads. As expected, everyone saw Xian put the 8 small flags into the 8 large circles. He used the metal threads to connect the flags, before he retrieved a ball of metal thread from some unknown place. He finally took out the magic cannon when all this was complete, carefully connect the cannon with metal thread. The entire process was simple. What happened next made everyone feel slightly bored. Xian took out a laptop, and typed continuously next to the magic cannon. Data flashed non-stop on the operating panel's giant screen. After this process had lasted for an hour, Xian finally got up from his half-squatting position when everyone was drowsy. "Then go in." Xian turned to Zheng. Zheng hurriedly said, "You have to give me some mental preparation. And why does your voice sound like you're talking to a guinea pig? You promise it'll be safe? There won't be danger?" "Yes, I promised." Xian looked away. "Why didn't you dare look me in the eyes?" Regardless of the process, Zheng still sat down helplessly in the center of the formation in the end. Although his heart felt very helpless within, this was still a step that had to be taken. His clone was too strong. So strong that even with Chaos, Genesis Splitter, he only had the certainty of perishing together. If he wanted to win and live on in the final battle, he needed to upgrade himself once more, whether in mentality or power. And this foundation establishment of cultivators was one of the ways forward to increase strength with how tight for time they were. Everyone around was stricken with fear, and especially when they saw Xian began depositing energy stones into the magic cannon with great fanaticism, a chill went through their bodies. There was sympathy in their gazes as they looked at Zheng. "Is it a figment of my imagination? Why am I seeing in Xian's eyes? Take care." Zheng sensed something was wrong. Sitting on the jade, just as he was about to open his mouth to question Xian, he suddenly saw Xian abruptly press the button for the magic cannon. Instantaneously, enormous energy rushed out. The giant jade lighted up like an electric lamp switched on. And Zheng was naturally the thing with the electric current passing through, his whole body shining. Everyone faintly smelled burnt flesh. "Zheng, what comforts you the most in this realm?" It should be a group of comrades I can trust." "Then, what's your greatest regret or your worst mistake?" It's definitely trusting that fellow Xian." For some reason, these words flashed through his mind as the electricity coursed through him. He immediately couldn't resist screaming. "Chu, Chu, Chu Xian, I'll kill." Zheng had been electrocuted so much that his entire body was spasming, and couldn't complete his sentence. Everyone still heard it clearly. However, when they saw Xian adjust his glasses and his expression change from that of fanaticism to hot-bloodedness, how would they dare stop Xian, who had activated power of faith? They thus could only look on with sympathy at Zheng. Zheng was suffering unspeakable pain in the electric current. This current was at least several tens of thousands volts of high voltage. His instincts continuously activated his genetic constraint, actually unlocking the initial 4th stage after a few seconds under this high voltage. If this continued, his body would likely automatically enter the dragon transformation state. "Zheng, this is just the energy storing. Greater energy waves will be produced soon. So, enter dragon transformation now. It'll protect your body with power of faith. Don't worry, you probably won't die," Xian said confidently. However, the content of his words didn't seem to have an iota of confidence. Probably. You're dead if it fails." Xian nodded confidently. I will kill." Zheng was continuously screaming, but he still obediently entered the dragon transformation state. When the dragon wings on his back extended, the jade platform abruptly shone brightly. The electricity from before turned into flowing light of a purely liquid state, slowly flowing within the runes. This scene looked beautiful. However, Zheng within knew of what he was going through. The previous pure electricity was painful, but at least the high voltage could be endured by his body and chi without even entering the dragon transformation state. However, when this flowing liquid light appeared, his body felt like it was on the verge of being ripped apart. Enormous energy was injected into his body, which was actually a highly compressed energy near that of refined qi. In an instant, the thin blood vessels on the surface of his skin had already been torn open, making him look like a man made of blood. In the cultivation manuals Xian translated, this step is actually very simple. As long as there was a cultivator helping to establish the foundation, the helping cultivator would infuse an energy in between qi and refined qi. Although this energy was also highly compressed, it would be akin to warm water and wouldn't damage the flesh. It would instead greatly improve the body of the person establishing the foundation. It was just that Team China had no cultivator, so the extremely simple process not only became complicated, but very dangerous. It could be said to be very crude. Xian had already activated power of faith at the moment. All that was seen him extending his hand in mid-air, pointing at Zheng. The magnificent colors that normally enclosed the gauze bullets now completely enveloped Zheng. When the flowing, bright energy touched Zheng, colors more beautiful than a rainbow gushed forth. Zheng's pained expression immediately softened in this colorful shroud. However, the tears on his skin continued to increase. Then, begin. Xian activated his power of faith, extending a hand to press the magic cannon. Damn not started yet. Before Zheng's trembling words could fall, the light of the jade platform brightened by 100-fold. Everyone shut their eyes in pain. Even Xian's light-dampening glasses became pitch-black shades. This fellow's glasses were a true treasure, seemingly capable of anything and everything. However, this light was only a momentary flash, disappearing after a moment. When everyone reopened their eyes, they discovered the jade platform had turned into powder. Zheng, who was lying there, was convulsing incessantly, his entire body covered in blood. He looked about to die. Everyone ran over unhesitatingly. Zero and Wangjia were even more direct, rushing into the jade crumbs to pick Zheng up. Zheng, however, desperately called out. Don't pick me up. Xian's about to die. Bring him to God for repair. Finished speaking, he fainted dead away. Everyone subconsciously looked down. They saw Xian standing there, his hair completely white. His face was covered with wrinkles, looking over a century old. Not only that, but his skin was withering at a visible speed. Slowly, he seemed about to soon become a skeleton. Yingkong's reaction was the quickest. She stepped down, charging to Xian's side. Then, she grabbed Xian's collar and rushed upstairs. Before she had taken a few steps, her eyes had become dull due to unlocking her genetic constraint. Her speed rapidly approached one that couldn't be followed by the eye because of her shining enhancement. However, unlike usual, where she couldn't control her direction as the enhancement was too fast and regularly crashed into walls, everything in the surroundings were clearly distinct this time for some reason. She had already dragged Xian over to God before even a second had passed. God, give him a full body repair. Yingkong shouted. She only relaxed when a beam of light enveloped Xian. Only now did she suddenly realize about her state before, where she could clearly sense the shining speed, as if everything was in the palm of her hands. Were further genetic constraints unlocked? No, the second stage wasn't able to control the shining when I tested it before. I haven't grasped the third stage fully either. Can simulation allow adapting to the shining speed? Could it be like that? Not long before, Yingkong had privately asked Xian how she could exhibit the power of the personality in her subconscious. With that power, her strength would instantly rise tenfolds, or even more. This power was what she needed the most now. However, she had only received a few sentences in response. Unlock a higher genetic constraint. The higher the genetic constraint, the more you and your main personality will merge, until you two become one. You might directly break through to the mid-fourth stage then. If that's so, could creating an opposite, second personality be a good way of overcoming the heart's devil? That had been Xian's response then. He then started being engrossed in his own things and started researching something. The unresigned Yingkong could only leave the basement, still not knowing how to unleash all the power in her body, just like before. The rest of the team rushed out from Xian's room just as Yingkong froze. Zheng then received a full body repair as well. Xian and him were suspended in the air, Zheng only slowly descending after 10 minutes. Xian was healed for almost half an hour, a length of time hitherto unseen. Although the two's wounds were fully healed, they still remained unconscious. The energy waves released during the instant of foundation establishment were too powerful. It was the energy emitted by the magic cannon, and although it wasn't in full, it wasn't something two people could resist. Now, their mental energy was depleted too much, causing them to pass out even though their physical bodies were fully repaired. Zheng only woke up on the afternoon of the third day. Even before his eyes opened, his body already told him the world was different. It was an indescribable feeling. As if his eyes could inherently see it, his ears could inherently hear it, and his tongue could inherently taste it, he could sense the boundless energy in the world. It was a truly mysterious and profound feeling. He wouldn't have been able to describe how he could sense this energy, where it was, and in what way it existed. The feeling of the energy in the surroundings was akin to how color couldn't be described. As Zheng gradually became clear-headed, this feeling that the surroundings were full of energy gradually dulled. It was as if the world had returned to normal when he opened his eyes. It was only that the refined qi and magic were more distinct than ever before, as if they were a part of his body. The two energies moved in accordance to his will, no longer as jerky as before. Zheng was delighted that he could freely control refined qi and magic within his body. However, he only played around for a few seconds, before immediately remembering how that fellow Xian had almost died during his Foundation establishment. He immediately looked around at his surroundings. This was the room Lori and him stayed in. He was the only one lying on the bed at this moment. Without thinking about it, Zheng dressed himself with the clothes on the bed and jumped off the bed. As he opened the door, the first thing he saw was a huge group of people eating hot pot in the living room outside the door, everyone eating until they were red in the face. When Zheng came out, everyone turned around and the area immediately went quiet, with only the sound of hot pot boiling. "You're awake?" Pleasantly surprised, Lori leapt into Zheng's embrace. Zheng hugged Lori. He comfortingly patted her head, before anxiously asking everyone, "Is that fellow Xian fine?" Everyone nodded, with Cheng Xiao immediately laughing, "Haha, relax. That fellow is Doraemon, he won't die so easily. He's probably having some wet dreams now, ha ha ha. You're talking about yourself, right?" This thought formed in the heads of many present, but the queries they had for Zheng now was slightly more. Hung was the first to open his mouth to ask, "Zheng, was your Foundation establishment successful? How about it? Can you control refined qi and magic?" Zheng sighed in relief when he heard Xian was fine. He smiled at Hung. "I haven't tested the effects yet, but so far, I seem to be able to control refined qi and magic." "Alright, well, test the power of Foundation establishment in the basement after eating." Foundation establishment was just the initial phase of cultivation. It was like the training of qi, when you could first sense qi. It was insignificant, and only slightly better than an ordinary human. It was still effective for strengthening the body, however. For facing against an enemy, unless you relied on your body to fight, there wasn't really any cultivation aspect to combat. But Zheng's circumstances were different. He didn't rely on cultivation techniques to battle. To him, cultivation techniques were merely to familiarize his own personal moves and combat techniques. His true power still lay in explosion, destruction, and chaos, Genesis Splitter. Be it physical techniques or magic techniques, they could all be terrifying when pursued to the pinnacle. When everyone had finished eating, Zheng went with everyone to the basement. There was a platform made of a metal alloy. This was where he usually practiced. Currently, he was standing alone on the platform, shutting his eyes tight to sense the refined qi and magic within his body. Explosion and destruction rely on qi and blood energy. They don't use refined qi and blood energy, so well, first test this move that is produced from refined qi and magic. Zheng considered, then immediately separated a strand each of refined qi and magic towards his two palms. He restricted the flow of these two energies, only having an iota of the two energies interact at the center of his palms. In a moment, a small ball of light, the size of an apple, with intense brightness appeared in his palm. However, it didn't explode like in Independence Day. This was because 1, he could already control refined qi and magic, and 2, he could separate out only an iota of the energies while using infinitesimal control. When the two fused, this ball of light similar to the magic cannon's energy actually peacefully existed. Holding in his hand, Zheng slammed the light ball into the ground. With a loud bang, the light ball actually didn't produce any explosion, only releasing a horrifying force when it came in contact with the ground. Fortunately, this force was under Zheng's control of refined qi and magic. When it smashed into the ground, a cloud of dust and metal rose from the ground. When the dust and metal settled, everyone far off saw that the metal ground had caved in, forming a giant hole over 30 meters in diameter. Zheng stood there unharmed, only blanking looking at his two hands. Good. If I can use this ability, that is a lower tier of chaos, my clone. I finally have the power to fight you. 6 days had passed since Zheng successfully completed his Foundation establishment. Counting the 2 days Xian and him were unconscious, there was only a day left from the next movie. No one had lazed around in these 6 days. On the second day after Zheng woke up, Xian also woke up. The first thing that fellow had done upon waking up was to collect Zheng's genes for research. Seeing his simple look now, he must have spent not just a day or two researching. The basic situation is like that. Among the DNA, there's mitochondria that has changed. The makeup of this mitochondria is like it has unlocked the genetic constraint and has evolved. Xian carried a large number of documents as he spoke to everyone. It's intriguing. If this is the case, cultivators really did walk a different path of evolution from saints. Apart from being in the domain of science, they're even different internally. No one present seemed to understand apart from Hunglu. However, Xian very patiently explained this time, the mitochondria within a human body has its own set of genes passed down, different from the genes humans passes on. In general, it can even be said that mitochondria are another race that is a parasite in the human body. Of course, this is only one way of putting it. In the past, when I was still in the real world, I heard several theories regarding mitochondria. The most bizarre theory was that the mitochondria used to be an organism several billion years ago. At that time, only cellular organisms or even the more basic amino acid organisms existed on Earth. These organisms all mutually devoured one another. Amongst them, there was a giant cell with great devouring abilities. After devouring the most basic prokaryote, this organism suddenly mutated, and the prokaryote wasn't digested. Instead, they formed a symbiotic relationship. What this theory means is that mitochondria are the genetic descendants of prokaryotes. Xian paused here. He picked up a document and said, saints relied on unlocking the genetic constraint in their bodies to evolve, while cultivators' foundation was to manipulate the mitochondrion to evolve. The two sides had a fundamentally different path of evolution. No wonder there was conflict during primordial times. The meaning of foundation establishment should be to let the sleeping mitochondria evolve, at least until the point of being it can adapt to refined chi and magic. Have you learned anything? Zheng laughed bitterly. What mitochondrion, what gene? Just say it in one sentence. When can you give me the cultivation techniques? My attack method now is letting refined chi and magic collide. Don't you think this crude method is an embarrassment to the word cultivation? That's your problem. Xian laughed coldly. Based on your clones' battles that you described to me, the comprehension the two of you have towards battle is in two completely different dimensions. Although there's the concept of breaking through technique with force, that's not an excuse for you to have crude battle techniques. The so-called strong enhancements and strong techniques will display different levels of power depending on how it's applied. For example, Cheng Xiao's Nanto Sucho Ken. If you and him have the same level of the genetic constraint, constitution quality, and technique, you may not necessarily be his match, nor will you definitely be able to create the ability of creating wind blades. I've already given you a cultivator physique as well as the key to unlocking power. How to become stronger and resist your clone is your problem. Zheng had been rebutted until he couldn't say anything in response. After a long time, he muttered, but, this cultivator physique is merely one that can use refined chi and magic. Apart from the technique I tested in the basement before, I can't think of any techniques to raise my power. A mortal's wisdom. Xian laughed coldly non-stop. He snapped his fingers, an extremely small gorgeous ball of light appearing on his finger. When he pinched it, a violent shockwave blew with a boom, making everyone nearby close their eyes. When they opened their eyes, Xian was already pointing a gauze pistol at Zheng's head. Remember, there are no absolutely strong enhancements or techniques. The so-called strong is defined from the differences in application. If this hasn't given you your hint, think about your clone's black flame. That's why I said, the comprehension the two of you have towards battle is in two completely different dimensions. Although you've closed this gap with brute force, you need to cross it if you want to beat him. I've given you the key. I leave it to you to decide how to use it. That technique of your in the basement was just scratching the surface. Although you say it like that, but what does that so-called different dimension mean? Carrying these doubts, Zheng entered the simulator to fight a few rounds with his clone. The present simulated clone was no longer his match. He could defeat this black flame using clone with merely destruction. However, this clone was from a distantly long time ago after all. After so much time had passed, the clone had long since progressed to some unknown stage. Also, the clone at that time obviously hadn't gone all out, so this simulation couldn't be taken for real. Still, my clone is truly strong. Even if I face him with my current strength, he'll still have to worry about that black flame. It's as if it has sentience when it protects my clone, even attacking enemies. What a terrifying technique. Wait, this black flame, could it be what Xian was referring to? Zheng's mind flashed, as he suddenly realized what Xian meant. Yes, if speaking from the perspective of energy application, he really was far too inferior to his clone. His clone had reached such a terrifying level even in Resident Evil Apocalypse. I see. Still, if I want to reach the standard, will I really be able to use it proficiently before the final battle? There's not enough time. The second day was the time to enter the perfect storm. In the early morning, everyone gathered on God's platform. Apart from Xian, Zheng also hadn't arrived, a rare thing. Not long after, Zheng and Lori came out from their room. What made everyone curious was that a set of dragon wings had appeared on Zheng's back. Although he hadn't completely entered dragon transformation, this pair of dragon wings signified he had entered the mid-fourth stage. Zheng, was the battle last night so intense that you entered the mid-fourth stage? Cheng Xiao patted Zheng with a strange smile on his face. Zheng laughed bitterly non-stop. Honestly, he himself thought this look was too strange. It looked suspiciously like he was imitating his clone. However, he had no choice. If he wanted to reach the level Xian spoke of, the first thing he had to do was stabilize the quality of his physique at this demi-dragon transformation. The strength of this physique was the prerequisite, along with a large quantity of refined chi and magic saved up. Although now he could produce them himself, the current efficiency was too low. After all, he only had the foundation establishment cultivation. Using the one ring to convert them was more efficient right now. Everyone chatted and laughed, asking Zheng the origin of this look. Zheng didn't hide it, telling them about how he was trying to test some new techniques out now. There's no choice. If I want to use this technique, my physique needs to reach the level of demi-dragon transformation at minimum, and needs to be maintained constantly. Otherwise, the refined chi and magic released will be wasted. Zheng laughed bitterly, gesturing with his hands. Everyone was curious, with Hung and a few others immediately asked what the technique was. Zheng frowned, not knowing how to explain. He beckoned towards Cheng Xiao, explaining it is troublesome, so he'll just show it to you first. Cheng Xiao, try to attack me. Remember, use the real Nanto Sucho Ken to attack me. Cheng Xiao didn't reject it. He directly jumped up to above Zheng's head, doing several somersaults. He used Nanto Sucho Ken to slash towards Zheng's shoulders. There was the ripping sounds of wind being torn apart. At the same time, Zheng's shoulder flashed with a gorgeous brilliance, and the mid-air Cheng Xiao was sent flying over 10 meters away. He fell on the ground, moaning continuously. Saw that? It's roughly like that. It's similar to the black flames that protect my clone, only that I didn't self-create the black flame technique, so I used refined chi and magic as substitute. Zheng gestured with his hands. Explosion. Destruction. Even chaos, Genesis splitter, are states that need to be entered during combat. In total, my techniques are actually quite few. Apart from these 3 all-out techniques, I need a technique for normal battles. In the basement before, I had separated out a strand of refined chi and magic to collide. Even a strand of them colliding had shocking power. Now, the key is that I have a cultivator's physique, so I can use these energies flexibly. I'm using them to cover the surface of my body. Refined chi extends outside my skin for about 2 millimeters, while magic is below my skin for about 1 millimeter. When I'm attacked, these 2 energies will collide and produce a counterforce. The greater the power of the enemy's attack, the greater the counterforce. And not just that. Zheng violently punched out with a single fist. A gorgeous brilliance flashed from his fist to his arm, and a spiraling wind followed this simple punch into an incredibly far distance. The metal ground 20 meters away abruptly exploded, a half-meter scar gouged out from the ground. I can collide refined chi and magic in a corkscrew motion. Also, I can make them collide after infusing it into a target object. Zheng placed his hands on the ground. As a gorgeous radiance flashed past his palms, there weren't any changes this time. However, a second later, Zheng gently stroked the ground. The metal there actually suddenly turned into dust, a depth of several meters disintegrating. This is only the initial stages of testing out the attack. When paired with chaos, Genesis splitter's high speed, even my clone wouldn't be able to dodge or block this attack. But it's still not enough. Strength is determined by the difference in application. Refined chi and magic should have better ways of being applied. After the next battle, I'll properly train before the final battle, then go and challenge my clone in my strongest state. Zheng's current state wasn't too good. Firstly, he wasn't used to having the 4th stage kept unlocked perpetually, as this would damage the body. Even if he only partially unlocked it, it would still cause great exhaustion. He had no idea how his clone maintained this state. Alright. The second last battle, the perfect storm, is next. Our one goal is to capture the Psyche Force user of the other side alive. Then, Team China will enter the final battle with most perfect team, to challenge Team Devil for the position of strongest. The Perfect Storm. It was a typical disaster film, a story about what happened after a storm came. Everyone had carefully watched it before entering the world as usual. However, no one could have expected the situation would be so abnormal. They appeared in the middle of the sea, surrounded by a vast and endless deep blue sea. It was fortunate that the start was the safe time, so everyone floated half a meter above the surface of the sea, as if stepping on something solid. God would protect everyone before the movie truly started. Isn't the situation a little too strange? Did God just dump us in the sea like this? Could he want us to swim across the Pacific Ocean? Hung looked at Zheng, a strange expression on his face. Ming Yanwei, who was besides Hung, snorted coldly. Not talking to Hung, she instead turned to Zheng. Zheng, what's the mission this time? Go to the island located at 123-124-15W, 2540-26N. Entering the island will allow immediate return to God's realm. Such a simple mission? Zheng looked at the watch with a strange expression. The remaining people all looked at their watches too. The mission God gave was as Zheng said. Entering the island at this coordinate would bring them back to God's realm. This was slightly similar to Resident Evil Apocalypse, where reaching a certain location would complete the mission. It was only that movie had other missions, and wasn't as blunt as this one. An island located at 123-124-15W, 2540-26N? That should be the Senkaku Islands, right? Wang Xia suddenly asked doubtfully. Yes, it should be the Senkaku Islands. Xian nodded, confirming Wang Xia's words. That's right, these two are soldiers. Wang Xia is a qualified soldier, so he should know the coordinates of the Senkaku Islands. That fellow Xian has a good retentive memory, so it's still normal for him to remember the coordinates of the island. It's just, isn't Cheng Xiao a soldier too? Looking at him, it seems he's never heard of it before. Zheng secretly thought in his mind. Sighing, Zheng said, isn't this movie too simple? We're done as long as we go to a location. Doesn't it sound like we're just here to play around? Speaking of which, the other team should have entered before us, right? Zheng had originally directed his question at Xian. However, he saw Xian was sitting there engrossed with translating, so he helplessly looked to Honglu. The boy didn't hesitate, immediately nodding assuredly, correct. No matter the team, they'll enter the movie first upon entering, unless they're Team Devil or Team Celestial. However, your words are only half correct. This movie is indeed simple, but it's only so for Team East Sea. Oh. These words made everyone froze. They didn't understand why such a simple mission was only easy for the weaker team, but conversely difficult for Team China. Zheng's mind flashed. He hurriedly said, what you mean is that since there's such a gap between the two teams, God has given Team East Sea a large advantage. It made the mission exceedingly simple. They'll be able to return safe and sound to God's realm as long as they can escape to the Senkaku Islands before we chase up to them. However, if we can't catch their Psyche Force user, Team China's power will have deficiencies in the final battle. Is this the difficulty God gave us? Yes, correct. Everyone is aware of what'll happen in the final battle if we don't have a Psyche Force user. So, we need to intercept Team East Sea before they reach Senkaku Islands. But unfortunately, this movie restricts flying equipment. Team East Sea, who entered before us, will have a far superior influence. Although this influence can only be used to hide and escape from our pursuit, but they really do have an advantage over us in going to Senkaku Islands. Hunglu ruffled his hair, chuckling. Zheng and the rest hurriedly looked at their watches, and text restricting flying equipment indeed appeared. Of course, an individual possessing flying techniques was a different matter. It was only that people who possessed flying techniques were few. In the over 10 teams in the entire realm, those with flight capabilities wouldn't exceed 10. It can't be, right? If we can't use flying equipment, are we supposed to take a ship? But, there aren't any ships in the vicinity. So, are we supposed to swim over? Cheng Xiao shouted loudly. Lan was still sleeping next to him. She had been sleeping for dozens of days. In this period, they had been relying on 3-needle nourishing. It would be difficult for the sleeping members if they had to swim to Senkaku Islands, and they were also at some unknown location now. After all, it would take months to swim if they were in the Atlantic now or the even further north and south poles. They would tire to death, so how would they be able to catch up to Team East Sea? Thus, everyone discussed for a while longer. They first took out a small airship basket. The airship basket itself was already filled with gas, enough to float on the surface of the water. They placed the sleeping members inside, then those who couldn't swim like Hunglu, until the basket was completely filled. The rest could only wait for the barrier to disappear and swim in the sea. Then it's decided. The protective barrier will disappear soon. He'll fly out to find a ship, then we'll chase down Team East Sea. Zheng considered for a moment. Xian coldly laughed. Can a normal boat catch up to Team East Sea? Since God has already arranged for us to battle, and we've never heard of this team before, we can tell how powerful they are. Based on God's usual practice of balancing power and influence, Team East Sea must be quite close to Senkaku Islands. We won't be able to catch up with a normal ship, unless we use special methods. Special methods? Everyone asked curiously. Only Hunglu was suddenly enlightened, and said, yes, God wouldn't give an unsolvable movie. Since God has arranged a team battle, God wouldn't let them safely go to the Senkaku Islands no matter how weak they are. So, there's something we're not seeing, and that loophole is the one chance we have to chase down Team East Sea. Xian, are you referring to? Before Hunglu's words could fall, the basket he was in suddenly dropped down. It fell a meter or two in the water, and the little boy violently choked on several mouthfuls of water. When the basket floated up to the surface, he coughed a few times. It wasn't so bad for him, as the sleeping Lan had already fallen into the sea. When the basket floated up, Zheng had already carried Lan and shot out of the water. The remaining people slowly floated out. The perfect storm had completely begun. As the movie had begun so suddenly, several people choked, drinking several mouthfuls of seawater. When everyone had finished choking, Zheng asked Hunglu, what do you mean? What does that refer to? A warship cough. Hunglu wiped away the water on his face. Although I don't know what ship Team East Sea is on, it can't possibly be a warship based on their strength. Even if they relied on a sneak attack to kill some soldiers from a naval port, they don't have sufficient power to deter the navy, let alone bring away a warship. This reasoning was simple. It wasn't possible to steer a warship just relying on a team with about 10 members. Even a smaller warship wouldn't be possible, as they lacked the specialist knowledge in this area. Capturing 1 or 2 Navy soldiers was easy. But, capturing a large group of them, getting them to help operate the warship as well as steering it safely out of the naval port wasn't just an ordinary level of difficult. It didn't require just power, but also a deterrence had to be prepared. It was like the atomic bomb towards weaker countries. Power that exceeded a certain level could deter those Navy soldiers. Thus, Team East Sea's power isn't enough to obtain a warship. If they're on an ordinary ship, their speed can't possibly be faster than a destroyer. If our location isn't in the center of the Pacific Ocean, the best way would be to find a naval port, then snatch a destroyer. Hunglu gestured with his hands. This was indeed a good way. They had to seize a ship anyways to go to the Senkaku Islands. Since they couldn't think of anything else, snatching a destroyer wasn't unacceptable. And, even if they didn't use the magic cannon, the combat power of the remaining members of Team China was also terrifying. There were several individuals who would require a few warships to be dealt with. However, Team China did have several weaknesses. One very big one was the lack of a Psyche Force user. When searching for an enemies in such a vast map, not knowing the enemy's location or numbers was absolutely a disadvantage. Fortunately, Team China was powerful, and was able to smash through cunning with force. Otherwise, they would very likely have lost horribly long ago in Independence Day. Snatching a warship also has another benefit. It can help search for ships in the surroundings, right? Good. Well, first find a ship in the vicinity, then find a naval port and make an all-out effort.